I Think I'm Sick has easily been one of the most profound experiences I've ever had as a cinematographer. The work that we were able to create, the story that we were able to tell, and the final product is something that I am truly the most proud of out of any project that I've ever made in my life. I'm excited to be able to share with you all a cinematography breakdown of one scene in the movie. I've been waiting to do this for a little while now. I finally got all the behind the scenes footage, and I'm able to kind of just talk a little bit about what we were able to do. Before we dive into it, I just want to preface the cinematography style of I Think I'm Sick. The goal with this movie was to create a world where it felt very realistic, but also polished in a sense, where it's maybe like heightened reality, where we're not using only natural light, and it doesn't look pretty, if that makes sense. We wanted it to feel real, we wanted it to feel grounded, we wanted it to feel natural, but at the same time we did need to augment some things in the scenes to make it look the way it does. So it's sort of like a heightened reality. But the goal is that the cinematography was a background character. It wasn't used as a main driving factor in the beauty of the story, in the sense of there's no extravagant camera movements, there's no big, huge lighting setups. I think the goal was to be able to allow the performances, allow the actors to do their thing and let their performance drive the story, and the cinematography just aid that and be able to create an environment for the actors to perform at the best of their abilities. And I think we truly were able to accomplish that. And with that being said, I still think it looks beautiful. I think it's a really well done, put together film visually. And I'm excited to share with you guys this scene from I Think I'm Sick. Camera wise for this scene, I don't remember the exact specifics of ISO, white balance, but I believe that we rated the cameras around 500 to be able to give us the cleanest look possible. Even with the Sony Venice on the dual ISO of 2500 and 500, I wanted to make sure that we were able to give the colorist full control. So we really went up to 25. We did in certain scenarios, but 500 was really our base to be able to give us the clean blacks, clean shadows without much grain. But for this scene, I believe white balance wise, we went slightly cooler in camera. So I believe we went to 43, 4500 to be able to combat the warmth that we were illuminating with the practicals, the overhead sources, the tubes, without making it overtly warm. I wanted to keep it kind of neutral so we can work on the color and warming it in post with the colorist. So the scene that we're going to be covering is towards the beginning of the film, and it's when our main character comes home to celebrate his birthday with his parents. But as you'll notice as I scrub through, it's pretty, bland, it's bleak. It's not supposed to be like an extravagant birthday. Danny specifically wanted a white birthday cake with nothing on it to signify the blandness and boringness and just nothing, essentially. And I think that goes along with everything that is in this scene. It's pretty mundane, it's clean singles, straight on. The performances are very dry, and as you could tell, the main character doesn't seem to be too stoked about his birthday. But I'm not going to dive into the story too much, but as you'll see, it's 4 shots. We start with an overhead, and the one thing I want to just note about the overhead is that we did not use the Sony Venice for the overhead. We shot everything on the Sony Venice except for some specialty shots. And the reason for that is due to time, due to budget, due to equipment. It was much easier to put the FX3 on a C-stand arm or a boom arm, whatever the key grip rigged up, and just throw that overhead. It was a way more efficient setup. So looking at this scene, I'm not going to talk too much about it, but it's a simple overhead, and the lighting essentially is just very frontal, filling in from an overhead source. It's not supposed to look like it's coming from any direction other than like the chandeliers that are above. But I think what's really cool is like production design, as simple as it is, the plain white plates, the plain cake, more plain white, everything is just white, sterile, plain, nothing. And I think that the simplicity of what art did really came across in Danny's vision, and being able to create like a mundane, boring birthday. the next setup we're going to be looking at is the wide setup, and this is the master, essentially. We're showing the main character, the dining table, the room, the environment, the parents. This is what we're looking at. This is the wide shot. And this was shot on the Sony Venice on 6 on the 32mm full frame. So you really get a good sense of the environment that we're looking at. And the first thing I want to note is these curtains right here and, you know, the darkness. For those that are wondering, we shot this in the morning or noon, somewhere around there, but it wasn't dark. It was bright sunlight, and we had our G&E team black out these windows. When you want to do a night setup, sometimes you want to put street lamps in the back, or you want to create a sort of you might want to tent the windows, essentially, so you could actually light the windows and make it look like nighttime instead of it just being black. But, you know, due to time restraints, due to being efficient, due to crew and, you know, equipment, blacking it out was the best option for us, and I think it actually benefited the story well, because there's nothing distracting about the black. If I had streetlights in the back, if I had moonlight coming through, I don't think it would have told the story properly. So I think the simplistic approach of just blacking out the windows and having the curtains cover it, I think really, in the moment, I wish I did like street lamps, but now looking back and, you know, after reviewing the entire film, the simplistic approach really does make sense for this film. So that's the first thing I want to talk about, is just blacking out the curtains, blacking out the windows. And you'll notice that behind Will right here, there's this little lamp, and that was just something I wanted to add to kind of separate him a little bit. And we went through a few different iterations of what kind of lamp that we wanted back there, but we added this little subtle thing behind the curtain so it wasn't too bright. But for me, it just adds like a little something behind him. I personally like it. Next thing you'll notice is another practical here, this lamp. It's not really playing as a light that's illuminating a person per se, but I just liked having the practical in frame. I thought it was a nice touch, and I just like the warm color temperature that's coming off it. The shade itself I thought was really nice. But the main light that we used for this project was overhead. Right here is a bunch of chandeliers that I actually have turned on. And the reason for turning it on is because I wanted to keep the natural look of what the environment was giving us, but I needed to augment that. So with the chandeliers on, we boomed out I believe it was a Amaron F22C light mat. So this, you know, rectangle light boomed across the table, and that is essentially illuminating everything coming down here. And what's really interesting about this setup is you get a nice return on the people's, even though on an overhead setup, and if you're not filling in from the side or below with a bounce board or a light itself, you get a lot of raccoon eyes, like a deep raccoon eyes. But what's cool is the production design, the white here is essentially creating that bounce. So it is bouncing back on her, it's bouncing back on him, and the father as well. Besides the bounce of the table, you're also getting these practical candles right here that are also illuminating them as well. So there's a few things going on here that are helping benefit the cinematography from a production design standpoint. The white tablecloth, the plates, the napkins, the cake, the candles, everything is getting bounced back from the overhead source to fill in their face a little bit. So the last thing that I want to note about the wide setup, and something that you don't see in this frame here, is behind camera, there were a few rooms that were connecting, and obviously, like I said before, it was daylight out, so there's a lot of natural light coming through the different rooms spilling into this room. So we had to black out the hallways. The reason why we did that is essentially just to make this room its own room and no other outside light influencing this look. So that was an important thing too, and that's just the main idea of being a cinematographer. No matter how simple the approach is, whether it's one light, two lights, just a practical in frame. How can you control the light that you're given? And this is a very simple approach, even though I personally think it looks amazing with how simple it is. there's a lot that goes into it with blacking out the windows, adding a practical in frame, coordinating with production design, and having the white tablecloth, the plate, the cake to bounce up, having the chandeliers, adding our own light bulbs in there for our own color temperature, and then blacking out the world behind us to be able to create a more controlled environment. So as simple as it is, there is a lot of things that go on to make a controlled environment. So the next shot is a close-up of our main character. I believe we moved to a 50mm on this one. Danny wanted to keep the close-ups on a more realistic look. So 50 was our go-to for close-ups. And the lighting really didn't change for this one, but I think what we did was just lower the Amaron, so it was slightly overhead, giving a nice return down. So the cake and the table also gave a nice return up to illuminate him. So as he's looking, I don't know if I can zoom in, you see that there is a nice eye light still, and it's very subtle, but it's there. And I personally wanted to try to get an eye light in Will, but it helps that the cake with the candles was the main reason for getting that eye light. So the other thing I want to note is just the symmetry. Will is framed dead center, and we have an equal distant curtain on the left as we do on the right, and he is framed in the middle of this curtain right here. Same thing goes with the table. It is equidistant here to here. The cake is also dead center. So you'll notice that everything is extremely symmetrical. And if we go back to the wide shot, it essentially shows the exact same thing, how symmetrical everything really is. And that was a big inspiration for us throughout this film, was symmetry, straight lines. It's almost like a Wes Anderson type of feeling. But I just wanted to note that symmetry and center framing was really important for this particular scene, and soloing each of the characters in their own world. All right, next shot, we're going to be talking about the mom here, and we're going to start getting into a new type of setup. But essentially, I took the aperture Amaron that was, directly overhead. I slightly moved it over, so we were getting more of a slightly far-sided key, even though it's still directly overhead. I moved it over slightly to be able to create a little bit of contrast on this side right here. The other thing I did was add a 2x3 neg right here, and that is essentially just blacking out this part to create some more contrast. So let's get rid of that ugly drawing. Let's get back. All right, cool. The one thing you'll notice though about her and the father in particular is that they do have a little bit more raccoony eyes here. And this was something personally that I struggled with too throughout the filming, was coming from the commercial space. Everything needs to have beautiful highlights. Everything needs to be wrapped beautifully. The Rembrandt lighting, commercial needs to be polished. But for this particular story, I really wanted to dive into this and challenging myself with keeping it real, keeping it with the emotion and the mood of this dreary, dark, kind of like gloomy atmosphere that the story is telling, and the cinematography should also tell that as well. And by not creating a big pop in their eyes and falling into the shadows, I think it kind of helps create this dreary look. Moving on to the next part of this scene, something else I added was a tube right in the background overhead, creating a little wash on the cabinets in the back. And you'll notice that without it, it would have just fallen to a little bit of darkness, but by adding that, it creates a nice spread behind her. So it's almost just like cascading behind her. It adds like a nice separation between her and the cabinet. And I believe we use the Nanlite Pavo tubes with barn doors. And it's important to use barn doors in this scenario because without it, it would have just spilled onto her a lot more. And I wanted to keep it controlled only for the cabinet. And last thing that you'll notice about this particular scene is these little lights right here. These were not built in. These are something that I added. These were Aperture MCs. MC here, and MC here, they were just gaff taped to the upside of the cabinet. And I made sure, again, going back to the idea of symmetry, she's, center framed here. This is equidistant. Each light is equidistant from her face. So it creates that subtle symmetry that is still like soothing and makes sense. But for me, it also just added a nice touch that otherwise would have just fallen into darkness. And, this one over here, it hits this piece of art that glimmers a little bit. So it's a nice little highlight. Same thing over here. So art did a nice job in adding some things that added a nice sparkle when the light hit it. Last setup that we're going to be looking at is similar to the mom. It is now looking at the dad. And this one obviously has a lot more raccoon eyes. It's a lot darker. The reason why I feel we went a little bit darker with him is because the mom in this scene is trying to be cheerful. She's trying to be loving, but the father feels like, again, I don't want to dive too much in the story, but it's almost like he doesn't want to be here. So again, we added another neg on this side, just blocking this whole side, creating a really, contrasty look on the father here. Again, we use the Amaron F22C. We moved it over a little bit to create this kind of far-sided top light. And it's also hitting his hair a little bit. The one thing I also want to note that I didn't mention in the mother is that if you look at the chandeliers, I actually think I talk about this in the behind the scenes. Each of the bulbs are filled with light bulbs, but every time we move to a single, I made sure that on the shadow side, so here, say there's light bulb, light bulb, light bulb, light bulb, light bulb, light bulb, I think that's how many there were. You get the point. These were all illuminated, so on, but for his, I made sure that these two were off. And the reason why I did that was because without it being on, it would have lit up this side of his face a lot more. So by adding the neg, the 2x3 solid, it automatically creates contrast. But by turning off two of the light bulbs closest to the shadow side, that is also another way to create contrast practically. Similar to the mom setup where we illuminated the cabinet in the back, we also did the same exact thing with the painting. We just illuminated with a pavo tube and barn doors. And again, looking at the image, it is filled with symmetry here. Everything is equal. The lines are perfectly straight. That just plays really well with the story that Danny wanted to tell, and it essentially just captures this person solo. We're not looking at an over the shoulder. We don't want to feel that connection with the other person. We want to kind of just be in this person's world for this moment, and we did a lot of that in this film. We did a lot of singles, and yeah, I think that's all we really did. And again, the aperture over here coming down, but also the table filling up a little bit. Again, playing with the raccoon eyes, playing with the darkness, the contrast. There really isn't an eye light in this guy in this one, but I think for the story it tells really well, and I think it was meant to be this way, that things weren't meant to be perfect. And I think by the end of this film, I ended up coming up with this, I didn't come up with this phrase, but a phrase that I adopted for this film was sometimes the imperfections are perfect. And that's hard as a commercial DP because you can't have imperfections. It needs to be perfect. And, I say that figuratively, not everything's gonna be perfect, but you have a lot more control in the commercial world where things need to be polished because people are paying big money for their product to be sold. But in the case of this film, we're telling a story that has an emotional element that is slightly dark, especially in this scene. So it's important for me as a DP to understand the emotional intent of the story and do my best to match that with the cinematography, with the lighting, with the camera position, the composition, the lens choices. And, it's so easy for me to just, ask for another 20 minutes to be able to wrap his face a little bit more. But this was also a deciding factor in, how can I light something, make it look this good? There are some flaws technically, but it also allows Danny more time with the actors to be able to get the performances the way he wants. And I think that's an important thing to note as a DP. It's not all about you and making sure your image is perfect. It's about how can we balance making a great image and also giving the director enough time with the talent to be able to perform and get the takes that they need. So yeah, that is a breakdown of this scene from I Think I'm Sick. Hopefully you learned a little bit. Hopefully you got a better understanding of the philosophy of the cinematography in this film. Hopefully you enjoyed the behind the scenes look of how we were able to accomplish this look paired with a more in-depth cinematography breakdown looking at the stills. I would love to be able to break down a bunch more scenes from this film. I have a bunch of BTS footage to be able to also coincide with the breakdown. So yeah, there are some scenes in this film that challenged me as a DP that I would love to talk about and share with you all. So hopefully you found some benefit in this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. So yeah, if you did, hit the subscribe button, like, comment, let me know your thoughts. And for those of you, the random few of you that are still living under a rock that have yet to see the trailer, click the link in the description, just watch the trailer. Trust me, it's worth it. So thanks for your guys' support. I'll see you guys next time. Have a great day. Peace out.